Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am super excited to have you here today. We're going to dive right into the fascinating and honestly pretty high-stakes world of corporate biometric data collection. I mean, think about it. From unlocking our phones to opening a new bank account, biometrics are literally everywhere these days. They are completely reshaping how we prove exactly who we are. But beneath all that sleek, futuristic convenience, well, there's a really complex web of technology, massive data responsibility, and entirely new frontiers for cybercriminals. So let's jump right in. Okay, I want to start by asking you a terrifyingly simple question. It's kind of the core of everything we're looking at today. You can reset a forgotten password, right? But can you reset your face? Think about that for a second. If a hacker steals your password, sure, it's a huge headache. You have to call the bank, answer a bunch of security questions, click a reset link, and boom, you've got a new password and the old one is dead. But if someone compromises the unique mathematical representation of your face or your voice or your fingerprints, there is no reset button for your physical identity. This completely unresettable nature of biometric data is exactly what we need to unpack. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 5 main areas. 1. The biometric boom. 2. The permanent data risk. 3. How criminals attack. 4. Accuracy, bias, and creep. And finally, number 5, building resilient defenses. Okay, let's get into section 1, the biometric boom. So biometrics are definitely no longer just for, top secret government facilities. They are entirely embedded in our day-to-day lives. For decades, the whole security paradigm just relied on passwords and PINs. But as we all know, those can be phished, you can forget them, or they can be forged using synthetic identities. So the industry had to pivot. Biometrics step up to the plate by adding crucial evidence of actual physical presence. It's a wildly effective way to prove that the person logging in is, in fact, the person who owns the account. But, and this is a big but, that massive upgrade in security comes with the really heavy burden of managing permanent, hard-to-replace identifiers. So where are we actually seeing this stuff? Well, everywhere. Financial institutions are asking for selfies to verify you when you're remotely opening an account. Employers are using fingerprints or facial recognition just to let you into the building. Customer service contact centers, they're actively analyzing the unique characteristics of your voice when you call in. But honestly, the wildest application might be the one you can't even see, behavioral signals. Digital platforms are out there analyzing your typing rhythm, the way you walk, and even how hard you tap your phone screen. Because these behavioral biometrics are largely invisible, a user might not even realize that their totally ordinary, everyday physical habits are being compiled into a permanent identity profile. Which brings us to section 2, the permanent data risk. All of this constant scanning creates an enormous, concentrated vulnerability. Because you have to realize, when a company scans your face, they usually aren't just saving a JPEG to a folder somewhere. They are creating what's called a template. The software extracts your measurable physical features and translates them into a mathematical representation. It then compares that new template against a stored one to spit out a similarity score. Now, the absolutely crucial thing to understand here is that a template is not just a harmless string of random numbers. As long as it can be traced back to an identifiable person and retains enough structure, it is highly sensitive, highly personal information. If that leaks, it carries incredibly serious security risks. And actually, the risk goes way beyond just the template itself. When we talk about governance, we really need to look at the complete data package. When you verify your identity, that system might also be scooping up the timestamp, your device ID, your IP address, your exact geolocation, every failed login attempt, images of your actual driver's license, and the liveness results. It builds this massive, heavily detailed access history. So truly securing a biometric system means you have to secure this entire contextual web of data. Because if a hacker gets their hands on this full package, that is an absolute goldmine for identity theft. Let's move on to section 3, how criminals attack biometrics. Look, criminals aren't just throwing their hands up and giving up because of a fancy new sensor. They have rapidly evolved some incredibly sophisticated ways to bypass this tech. The most obvious physical threat is what the industry calls a presentation attack, and it's exactly what it sounds like. A criminal essentially presents a fake physical artifact to a camera or scanner. We're talking photographs, high-tech masks, artificial silicone fingerprints, or plain a synthetic AI-generated voice into a microphone. Now, organizations try to fight this using liveness detection, which is software designed to figure out if it's looking at a living, breathing human or a lifeless fake. But presentation attacks, those are really just the tip of the iceberg. There is actually a much more insidious, entirely invisible way hackers attack remote onboarding. Think about it. When you sign up for an app sitting on your couch, the bank doesn't control your phone or your camera. That lack of control is a huge vulnerability. Criminals deploy emulators or use what's called screen injection. They use deepfake tools to completely bypass the physical camera lens altogether. So instead of holding a mask up to a webcam, they inject a deepfake video directly into the app's internal data stream. The bank system receives what looks like a perfectly clean, high-quality video of a customer, but the whole thing is 100% synthetic. The physical camera was never even turned on. Moving right along to Section 4, Accuracy, Bias, and Creep. Let's take a quick pivot away from external hackers for a second. What happens when the technology itself is flawed or just set up poorly? Biometric recognition isn't absolute certainty. It's a probabilistic high-wire act based on similarity scores, and this creates a major double risk. On one hand, you have a false match. This is when the system thinks two totally different people are the same person, which obviously grants access to an imposter. On the other hand, you have a false non-match, where the system rejects the actual genuine person. This locks a legitimate customer out of their own bank account or blocks a vital payment. So setting the sensitivity threshold is this really delicate balancing act. Set it too weak and bad guys get in. Set it too strict and innocent people get locked out. And to make matters worse, tests constantly show that these error rates can swing wildly based on things like lighting, camera angles, age, and very problematically, different demographic groups. Aside from the accuracy issues, we also run into the massive privacy risk of function creep. This happens when data that was collected for one very specific, totally acceptable reason suddenly becomes really tempting to use for something else entirely. For example, imagine a company requires a facial scan just to get into the building for security. Makes sense, right? But then, a year later, management decides to use that exact same camera data to monitor employee productivity and track how long people are at their desks. Or maybe a voice recording gathered just for customer service training gets converted into a permanent voice print. This totally destroys the concept of meaningful consent, especially when there's an imbalance of power, like between a boss and an employee who literally can't say no if they want to keep their job. Okay, last but not least, Section 5, Building Resilient Defenses. So, considering all of these intense risks, deepfakes, false matches, function creep, how do responsible companies actually protect this unresettable data? Well, building a resilient defense requires a layered approach, basically a control stack. First, an organization has to document why they absolutely need this data and rigidly limit its purpose. Second, minimize the data. Whenever possible, verify the biometric right there on the user's physical device, so the company only ever receives a simple pass or fail signal, not the actual face scan. Third, meticulously encrypt those templates so they can be revoked if a breach happens. Fourth, independently test the algorithms across all demographics to guarantee fairness. Fifth, never ever rely on biometrics in a vacuum. Layer it with device and transaction intelligence. And finally, you always need a human in the loop. There must be human review and an accessible fallback option for when the automated system inevitably fails a real customer. Basically, no single layer of security should ever be treated as an unquestioned source of truth. Now, what if the absolute worst happens and a breach occurs? Well, effective incident response here is vastly more complicated. Your standard password reset playbooks, they are completely useless here. An organization has to figure out exactly what was exposed. Are we talking raw photos or mathematical templates or liveness data? Then they have to revoke the affected templates and securely force users to re-enroll. Crucially, they have to actively monitor for secondary misuse. A stolen voice template might not work on the bank's highly secure app anymore, but you better believe a criminal will use it to generate a deep fake audio clone to socially engineer the victim's grandparents. Organizations must step up and provide transparent, highly specific guidance to their customers about what was lost and what the actual risks are. Ultimately, it really all boils down to this one powerful reality. Biometric data absolutely can make identity harder to steal. But poor biometric governance can make the consequences of that theft so much harder to escape. If you take away one thing today, let it be this: corporate responsibility literally has to begin long before this technology is ever deployed. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over regarding your own digital footprint. As society sprints headfirst into this frictionless, passwordless future, we really need to pause and ask ourselves, is the sheer convenience of a quick selfie truly justifying this highly intrusive level of data processing, especially when far less invasive alternatives are still sitting right there on the table? It is a profound question that both companies and consumers are going to have to reckon with very soon. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the tech around you, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.